Hi, I'm Tom Beauregard. I'm the CEO and founder of HCG Secure. I'm joined today by Cameron Huddleston from Carefull, and we're here to talk about the finances and longevity, the truth about finances and longevity. Quick background on me and my company, what we're focused on. I am a long-term healthcare veteran. Came out of an underwriting actuarial program many years ago, transitioned into consulting, and then spent about 15 years as the Chief Innovation Officer at United Health Group. In that role, I ran the product organization for our Medicare business, United Healthcare's Medicare business. And what we saw all the time was that folks later in life had kind of a blind spot when it came to long-term care, not having planned for it, not really having an understanding that Medicare doesn't cover it. And so when I left United about 4 years ago, I founded HCG Secure and really started to focus on this issue. I'll give you more details as we go through this discussion today, but thematically, what we're focused on is providing middle-income families with access to affordable long-term care solutions, along with services that really help them plan while they're healthy, way upstream of any kind of long-term care event. So looking forward to the conversation, and I'll turn it to Cameron for a introduction.
Hello, I am Cameron Huddleston. I am the Director of Education and Content at Carefull, which is the first service that was built to organize and protect the daily finances of older adults and to support coordination with their family caregivers. I was a caregiver for myself for more than 12 years for my mom when she had Alzheimer's disease. I'm also a longtime personal finance journalist, and I wrote a book about talking to your parents about their finances. It's called Mom and Dad, We Need to Talk. So I have been involved for many years in encouraging people to have family money conversations, to talk about finances, to talk about long-term care, to make a plan. And so I'm joining Tom today to encourage everyone to plan for living a long life. And it does take planning because your finances are going to play a role, and the better job you do of planning, the more comfortable your life is going to be as you age.
Great. So let's get started and talk a little bit about the sort of the need for long-term care and the expense that's related to it. As I said in my opening comments, most people, as they're heading into retirement, they're just not thinking a lot about long-term care, and they haven't explicitly saved for it. People save for retirement income. That's always been the focus. And the reality is, what happens to folks is they go through the course of retirement. They do what's called spending down, right? You don't have an income anymore. You have Social Security and you have your Medicare benefits, but you're spending a lot of your assets down as you head towards the end of life. And the reality is that, from an actuarial standpoint, about 70% of us will need long-term care, and it's typically towards the end of life. It's not a topic that folks like to think about, but it's just a reality, and it's expensive. So just again, to talk about sort of the probability, 70% of us will need it. If you're a couple, there's a 91% chance that you'll have a long-term care event between you. The average tenure of a long-term care claim is about 2.5 years. And what I mean by that is it's the time that people need support, whether it's custodial care in the home or institutional care. And, back to our theme on focusing on middle Americans, most folks who are in the middle income demographic, by the time they get to the need for long-term care, they are spent down and they just don't have a lot of cash left. So they have to rely on family. A lot of people, again, if you think Medicare covers it, it doesn't. Medicaid does, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go, but it's very difficult to qualify for Medicaid. And frankly, it's not a great thing, but the focus here is you ought to have a plan. The probability is high, the costs are high. And if you look at actual data on families, nearly half aren't confident that they could afford caregiver help, even if you kind of reveal the need.
One of the other issues that we face as we age, in addition to needing long-term care, which is support with the daily activities of living, bathing, dressing, getting in and out of bed, which can be very expensive, as Tom just mentioned. But one of the other issues that we face as we age, and this is something we all face if we live long enough, is that there are changes to our brain. Just like our body changes, our knees get saggy, we get wrinkles, our brains shrink. And I know that sounds really scary, but this is part of the natural aging process. So when you get up and go to the refrigerator, you forget what you went to the refrigerator for. That's natural. That's part of aging. But this shrinking of our brains impacts our ability to manage our finances and to make financial decisions. And so, what that can mean is as we get older, a lot older, it can become more difficult to track our spending, to balance a checkbook, to manage cash, to stay on top of multiple accounts. Of course, anyone who is experiencing Alzheimer's disease or a related dementia, this is going to be even more challenging for them. Managing finances, making financial decisions, these things are greatly impacted when there is any type of dementia. So we all need to be aware that even if we or a loved one does not experience dementia, though, our financial decision making ability, our ability to manage our finances can be impacted with age. And this is something we need to be aware of, because if we are blind to this risk, then we are essentially putting ourselves at greater risk of making money mistakes and being exploited with age. The risk of losing money to exploitation does increase with age for all those reasons I just explained. Adults 60 and older lose an estimated $28.3 billion annually to elder financial exploitation. And this includes both exploitation through scams and fraud by strangers and theft by those who are close to us, family members, caregivers, neighbors who might take advantage of us as we age. 1 in 20 adults can expect to experience some form of financial exploitation over the age of 60. Now, this is a higher incident rate than many age-related diseases. Those who experience fraud, and anyone can experience fraud, all adults can become victims of fraud, but those who experience fraud loss, when that happens, older adults tend to lose more money than younger adults who are victims of fraud. Just to give you some figures here, the median fraud loss for someone aged 20 to 29, and this was in the past year, was $548. For adults 60 to 69, that median loss per victim was $666. For adults 70 to 79, the median loss was $1,000, and for adults 80 and older, it was $1,674, 3 times as much as adults in their 20s. This happens for a variety of reasons. Scammers love to target older adults because they see them as cash cows. They have retirement income. They have a steady source of income from Social Security benefits, and so they see them as a source of money. Older adults also can become more prone to exploitation if they are living in isolation, if they are not communicating regularly with family members. Of course, if there is any sort of cognitive decline, then that's going to make them at greater risk of exploitation. And so I just want everyone to be aware of how, as we age, our risk of exploitation increases.
Yeah, and I think sort of the broader that Cameron did a nice job of talking about the sort of the fraud and the exploitation, and that's what obviously Carefull focuses on quite well. The broader ways to limit risk, as we have this conversation, is to really be transparent with your family about your money situation and give people that you trust access to your plans. Another really important point is to have documentation in place, and we see this all the time in the long-term care arena. A lot of families, they enter retirement and then they go through retirement to much older ages, and they never put an advanced care plan in place. And advanced care plans are, in place to help families understand an individual's risk, sort of desires when they're terminally ill. And without advanced care plans, you can throw your family into havoc. Frankly, they don't know what to do. And then sort of another sort of important document that, again, a lot of families don't have in place because they haven't worked with financial advisors during the course of their working years, is wills. Just, basic wills, and they're not hard to put together, but they should be in place long before you sort of anticipate passing away. You just want to have these sort of critical documents in place for your family. And then the final sort of theme around limiting risk is to have a plan for long-term care. And that doesn't necessarily mean insurance. It can just mean explicit savings. It can mean, other kinds of instruments that you put in place, but have a plan for long-term care. And we'll talk in more detail about sort of the variations that exist in this arena, and communicate that plan with your family. Let your loved ones know sort of what your desires are.
Let's start with talking to your family about your finances. And so if you are the parent, the older adult, I know that the idea of sharing some information about your finances with your children might seem a little strange. A lot of times we don't talk about money, it's a taboo topic. If you are an adult child and I'm telling you that you need to be talking to your parents about their finances and you grew up in a family where money was not discussed, of course it might seem really awkward to have this sort of conversation. But these conversations really are where you want to start. Families need to be sharing information. Parents need to be sharing information with their children about their finances. If the parents aren't talking, the adult children, other family members need to be asking, because sharing this information is the way to ensure that your family members have the details about your finances that they will need to protect your finances if something happens to you. As Tom already pointed out, 70% of adults will need long-term care. What that means is that someone, likely an adult child, will have to get involved in your finances. If they have to play detective, it's going to make it so much more difficult for them to help you, to ensure that your bills get paid, to communicate with your insurance providers, to have access to your bank accounts. You need to share some details about your finances with your family members. I mean, having these talks allows you to show how you want your finances managed if you become unable to yourself. If you don't tell your kids how you want your finances managed, if you become unable to, they're going to make decisions for you and you might not agree with those decisions, but it's too late at that point. And having these family money talks also allow you to build a circle of support before emergencies happen. If you don't have this circle of support before you are unable to manage your finances on your own, then other people you might not trust are going to step in and they might try to take advantage of you. So you want to make it very clear, which kids, which family members you want to play a role in your finances and in your care as you age. Adult children who are listening to this, you want to talk to your parents and find out what role they expect you to play. You need to get clear on this before there's any sort of health emergency. You don't want to wait for that emergency to happen, because when emergencies happen, the last thing people want to talk about is finances. Emotions are going to be running high. You want to deal with the situation at hand. The plan needs to be in place before that. Finally, another thing is, if these conversations aren't happening before emergencies, of course, that difficult situation is going to be even more challenging. But what you might discover is that you don't have the legal right to make financial and medical decisions for your parents. Tom's going to talk about this more, but if your parents haven't already named you power of attorney, healthcare surrogate, you can't sign checks for them. You can't talk to their doctors. These legal documents need to be in place. They need to be signed while your parents are still competent. Parents who are listening to this, these documents have to be in place. Signing these documents now does not mean you're handing over control to your children. What it means is that you are making a decision about who can manage your finances, who can manage your health care while you are still in control. So, how do you have these sometimes awkward conversations? Well, they don't have to be that awkward if you come from a place of love and respect. If you are the adult child talking to a parent, if you are the kid, some ways to start the conversation: you can ask for advice. This works really well for younger adults who are just starting out. For example, you could say, hey, mom and dad, we just had our first kid. Does that mean that we need life insurance now? Should we have a will? Asking those questions, when you get answers from your parents, their answers are going to give you clues about what sort of planning they have done, and then you can ask more questions. You can share a story. This works really well if you are in midlife. You are bound to know someone through work, through your social circles, who has gotten involved with a parent's finances. Maybe it's a colleague who has had to take time off from work to care for a parent, and there was no long-term care plan, and now your colleague is struggling, and so it's a cautionary tale. Or maybe it's a friend whose parents passed away and they had all those estate planning documents in place, and it made it so much easier for your friend. So you can share that story to start the conversation with your parents, or you can talk about your own financial planning experience or your estate planning experience. Maybe you met with an attorney recently to draw up a will. You can tell your parents, hey, mom and dad, I want you to know that I have these estate planning documents that are in place. I want you to know where they are so you can find them in case something happens to me. Now, if you are the parent, you can start these conversations by letting your children know that you want them to be aware of what sort of planning you've done or what roles they might have to play in your life and in your finances as you age. Now, this is really important though. As the parent, I really encourage you not to ever make your kids make any sort of promises they can't keep. And I'll give you an example. Don't say to your kids, please promise never to put me in a nursing home. Okay, you never know what could happen. There might be a fall, and you might have to spend a few weeks in a nursing home for rehabilitation, but your child doesn't want to break that promise that they've made to you. So it's okay to let your kids know what your expectations are, but please don't make them make any promises that you know they might not be able to keep. So keep this in mind as you're having these conversations. It's also important to know that this is not just a single conversation. This is a series of conversations. You want to keep these conversations happening over time, because the last thing you want to do is sit down and spend hours grilling your parents over the details of their finances or telling your kids everything about their finances. It's too much for everyone involved. And so this is going to be a series of conversations where you're going to be discussing retirement planning, emergency planning, estate planning, long-term care planning. All of these things need to be discussed. One thing that you can do to make it easy, if you're the child talking to your parents, or if you're the parent initiating this conversation, is to simply make a list of all of the assets, accounts, account usernames and passwords, insurance policies, other relevant information about your finances. Tell trusted family members where this list is and how and when to access it. If you are the child having this conversation with a parent, this allows the parent to maintain control of this information until that parent is ready to provide it to you. And so have that list, because then everything is there in one place and it's accessible in case there is an emergency.
Yeah, I would say the list idea is a great idea. We've done a lot of research in this space as an organization, and we consistently hear from family members that just trying to sort out the type of insurance that mom or dad has, the sort of their financial circumstances, whether they have a will or advanced care plan, is a nightmare for families when there's a sort of a crisis. And so, and I also love the sort of the broader advice on the conversation that has to happen over time, because frankly, most people just don't want to have these conversations, right? You don't want to think about your physical decline or your cognitive decline, but Cameron's advice on sort of broadly, how to have this ongoing conversation, it's absolutely critical. Um, and then if we think a little bit more about sort of the conversation on long-term care, it's sort of at a more specific level, there needs to be sort of within it, and I think it's part of that broader context that Cameron set. It's what do you want? Like, does someone want to age in place as long as possible? And again, no promises, but at least express to your family, your loved ones, what your desires are. And the reality is, most people do want to age at home for as long as possible. But there's a percentage of folks that actually do want to segue into residential living and move to 50 plus, where there are tiers for long-term care over time. But those are important conversations to have with your family before the crisis, before there's a decline that is where people just have to act. The obvious point is, this is, keep hammering on this, but it's expensive, and it's kind of at the end of life generally. From an insurance perspective, this generally occurs for families when they're in their 80s. For individuals when they start to see functional decline and cognitive decline, and whether it's in-home care or institutional care, it's quite expensive. I also kind of like, just in terms of the support, Cameron's circle of support theme. It's important to also understand within a family who might be responsible for what, right? People have different strengths, they have different desires, different sort of geographic proximity. So as part of these conversations, understand if your family's willing to be a caregiver, if they can help you financially, if you're not covered for this, how much they might be able to help you find care. There's a lot of research that has to occur for families, and doing as much of this in advance and defining that circle of support, clearly articulating that through these conversations is important. Paying for long-term care, different options here, and these are pretty broad. People that are unprepared oftentimes try to turn to Medicaid. So just to be kind of insurance-y here for a second, Medicare does not pay for long-term care. Medicaid does, and that's state by state. So if you are really depleted from an asset perspective and an income perspective when you need long-term care, you can try to qualify for Medicaid, but it's difficult. And there's, it's state by state rules. There's always like a 5-year look back to make sure that people weren't shedding assets along the way. But it's nothing that families should count on, because it's very, very difficult to qualify for Medicaid coverage. And frankly, Medicaid coverage also comes with sort of limited choices in terms of the kind of care that's available for families. So you don't have a lot of options if you're able to qualify for Medicaid and you get that coverage. Another option is just to pay out of pocket. But, our theme, we're always focused on families that are heading into retirement with maybe $400,000 or $500,000 in assets at 65. By the time someone's 80, most of those assets are depleted. So paying out of pocket is difficult for most middle income families. A third option is to rely on your family. But that's a pretty heavy financial burden if you've got a family that has to pay for your in-home custodial care or residential care. And there's a lot of data out there and a lot of stories on caregiver burden, both sort of emotional burden, caring for mom or dad, but also financial burden, because oftentimes it's kind of a cycle. A middle income family ages, they need long-term care support. Their kids might be middle income as well, and now they're depleting their savings or having to change the way they work, move to part-time to try to help mom and dad, and that has really significant financial implications. And then the fourth category is to basically cover it with some form of insurance, whether that's traditional long-term care insurance, what are called hybrid policies, which are basically life insurance policies that allow a family to accelerate a life payment to cover long-term care, or a series of new options that are being developed to be more affordable and more accessible. And that's what we're focused on as a company, is creating these options that families can get later in life that don't have medical underwriting associated with them, that are aimed at covering that 2.5-year gap. we talked a lot about the need for sort of legal protections, and having documentation in place. This is critical, and I won't continue to belabor the point, but when someone is heading into retirement really well in advance of retirement, but at a minimum, as you head into retirement and you start to think about these things and communicate with your family, it's not hard. It really isn't difficult to put together a simple will, to put together an advance directive. Um, One of the things that we've done with the products that we've developed is offered these services upstream. So our primary focus is to offer that affordable extended care, long-term care insurance, but embedded within our products are things like support with putting together an advanced care plan, together a will, helping families make a plan when someone needs long-term care. So one of the services that we offer is an assessment where um, a, a social worker who's focused on elder care will work with the family to really help define sort of what the need is. Can mom or dad stay at home? How much custodial care do they need? Or do they need institutional care? Um, so basically having these things in place upstream is critical. And our perspective is they should be integrated in with the insurance solution so families have upstream support. Cameron actually mentioned this, sort of having a list of things. One of the things that we do with our policyholders is we send them a list that basically says, here are the things you should have in place. You're in your kind of go retirement years, you're healthy. Let us help you sort of way upstream get prepared for a potential sort of long-term care event with your family.
I want to add a little bit. Let's go back for just a second to the estate planning documents because I want to add a little bit to this. Um, just to emphasize the importance of having these documents in place. I know a lot of times people think estate planning, that's something only wealthy people do. All adults
Yeah.
need a will or a trust, a document that puts their wishes in writing. Because if you die without a will, the state has one for you. State law will determine who gets your assets. And so your money, your property might go to someone you don't want having your money or property. And so you've got to have that will or trust in place, letting people know who gets your stuff, even if you don't have a lot of money, a lot of property. It's so important to have this document. You don't want your family to end up in court fighting over who gets what. And I tell you, when money is involved, people who normally get along can end up fighting. I think just as or even more important than that will or trust is the power of attorney for financial and medical care. You want to make sure that you, the adult or the adult child talking to the parent, has that power of attorney that names someone to make financial decisions for you. If you can't, a healthcare power of attorney, it's also called a healthcare surrogate, someone to make medical decisions for you if you can't. These documents have to be drafted and signed while you're still mentally competent. If mom and dad have not named a power of attorney, something happens, they're no longer mentally competent, and a family member has to step in and start signing checks for mom and dad to make sure the bill gets paid, get on the phone with the insurer, with Medicare. If there is no power of attorney, then you have to go to court. And you're putting your parent on trial to prove that they're no longer competent so that you can become their conservator or guardian. This is a very expensive process and it's emotionally draining. And so having these documents in place beforehand is so important. And that advance directive, you want to know what your parents' end of life wishes are so that you're not making that decision for them. And for the parents, you want to put your end of life, what sort of medical care you do or do not want. Do you want to be kept on life support? That needs to be written down in an advance directive, a living will, so that your family doesn't make that decision for you. Again, because if these documents aren't in place, your family's going to make these decisions and they might not be, someone might step up to go to court to become your conservator. It might be that cousin you never trusted and now they want to get access to your money. These things happen. And so having these documents in place really does allow you to maintain control as you get older. We can move on to the next one because it's part of protecting yourself in case there is a healthcare emergency. if there is a financial emergency, but it also helps you avoid exploitation. Creating that circle of support, having those estate planning documents, those things lay the groundwork to protect your finances as you get older. Because as I mentioned, older adults lose more than $28 billion a year to exploitation. And like I said, it can happen from strangers. It can also happen by people who are close to the older adult. And so one of the best ways to avoid exploitation, other than laying this groundwork, is to know the red flags of scams. So here are a few key ones. If you are getting a phone call, an email, a text message out of the blue, and someone is claiming to be with a government agency, the IRS, Medicare, Social Security, it's a scam. Those government agencies will not call, text, or email you out of the blue. If someone is calling, texting, or emailing you asking you for personal information, like your social security number, or if they're asking you to make a payment right there on the spot and they're asking you to pay with a gift card, with cryptocurrency, with a wire transfer, or using a payment app such as Zelle or PayPal, again, it's a scam. Legitimate businesses, the bank is not going to call you and ask you to provide your account number. Okay, if you call the bank and they need to verify who you are, they might ask for some information. But your bank is not going to text you or call you and ask you for your account information. This is a scam. If someone is telling you on the phone, don't tell anyone about this, don't ask anyone for help, don't get law enforcement involved, it's a scam. These are all scam red flags. Hang up, don't respond, don't click on any links in an email, even if it appears to come from a company that you know. Instead, reach out to that company directly and say, hey, were you trying to get in touch with me about an issue with my account? Being aware of scams will make you less likely to interact with them. Research has found this. Now, another way to protect yourself is to use strong, unique passwords for all of your accounts. And it's actually a really good idea to have online access to your financial accounts. That doesn't put you at a greater risk of fraud. In fact, it allows you to check on your accounts regularly rather than waiting for the end of each month to get a statement to make sure everything is okay. So you want to make sure you have access to your bank account, your credit card account, your investment accounts, and Social Security. You can create a free My Social Security account so that you can keep tabs on your benefits. Really good idea to make sure you have access to as many accounts as possible, but you want to use a strong password for each account, and it needs to be a different password. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is not a strong password. It needs to be a combination of upper and lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. In fact, you can use a password manager to create and store passwords for you. Carefull, which is an account monitoring service that you can link to your bank, credit card, investment accounts. It includes a vault, a digital vault where you can store your documents, and it will create and store passwords for you so that you have really tough passwords that a hacker is not going to figure out. It's a good idea to put a security freeze on your credit reports, even if you're not a victim of identity theft. Do it proactively, because if your personal information falls into the wrong hands, someone can use that information to open up accounts in your name, run up debt in your name, and you're probably not going to find out about it until the damage has been done. If you go to all three credit bureaus' websites, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, you can click on Place a Security Freeze on my credit reports. It's free, and you can lift that freeze if you need to apply for credit yourself. But once you have that security freeze, really it makes it impossible for someone who might get their hands on your information to open an account in your name. So do this, or if you're an adult child listening to this, help your parents place security freezes on their credit reports. Take advantage of account, credit, and identity monitoring services such as Carefull. Like I said, Carefull can be linked to your bank, credit card, investment accounts. It's going to monitor those accounts 24/7 for unusual transactions, signs of fraud, and even money mistakes. It's going to let you know, for example, if you are late on a bill payment, or if you've made a duplicate payment, or if there are subscriptions that you seem to have forgotten about, or a charitable contribution that you thought you only made one time, but somehow you've been enrolled in recurring charitable contributions. So you're going to get alerts about that. You'll get alerts when there are hits on your credit report, changes to your credit report. If your personal information is being sold on the dark web, you'll be alerted by Carefull. And so using some sort of account monitoring, credit monitoring, and identity monitoring is a great way to stay safe. Make sure you name trusted contacts for your investment and financial accounts. Trusted contacts are someone you choose that your financial institution can reach out to if they are unable to get in touch with you and they suspect that there might be exploitation, some sort of fraudulent activity in your account. Naming a trusted contact does not give that person access to your accounts. It's just a safeguard to have in place. It's also a good idea to get a second set of eyes on your finances as you age. Maybe that means, letting your kids have view-only access to your accounts so that they can make sure that nothing fishy is going on. If you start to experience any sort of cognitive decline, you might not realize it, and you might not recognize that you are being taken advantage of. But if you have trusted family members who are keeping a watchful eye on your finances, they're going to spot those signs and they're going to be able to say, hey, something looks off here. Let me get in touch with mom and make sure everything's okay. Again, Carefull allows you to name trusted contacts within our system and give them view-only access, or you can choose just to let them get alerts when Carefull sends you alerts. You get to choose how much access they have, but they can never access the funds in your account. At most, it's view-only. Also, it's really important to keep the lines of communication open with your family members. So if you're the adult child, if you hear about a new scam, let mom and dad know about it. As the older parent, if you feel like you're having trouble, reach out to someone you trust. If you get a call and it sounds suspicious, call your kids, call your sister, call your brother, call someone you trust to get that second opinion. But keep those lines of communication open. That's the best way to protect yourself from scams and fraud and exploitation as you get older. Finally, for all the adult children who are listening, you want to make sure that you are helping keep your parents safe as they get older. And parents who are listening, I hope you're willing to let your children help keep you safe. Adult children, you need to be on the lookout for signs that your parents might need some additional support with care and their finances. Some of the things that you can look out for: has your parent gone from organized to disorganized? There's nothing physically wrong with them. They used to keep the house clean all the time, but now there are piles of papers. The laundry isn't being washed. This could be a sign that there is the beginning of cognitive decline. They can't manage those household tasks like they used to. If you see reminder notes, little sticky notes all over the place, maybe by the TV, telling them how to, get to Netflix and, watch their favorite shows, this can be a sign that there are memory issues going on. I saw this with my mom, reminder notes everywhere, and she went from being organized to disorganized. If they have piles of unpaid bills and collection notices, or if you're noticing a lot of charitable contribution requests, if there are a lot of those already, that means your parent has already been giving and they're on those lists. And if there is any sort of cognitive decline, your parent who maybe gave to one charity once a year might be making donations every month because that financial decision-making ability has been impacted. Again, I saw this with my mom. She would write checks to almost every organization that asked for money. I had to get involved and help. Essentially, what I would do is sort the mail for her, sort the junk from the bills, and toss all those solicitations because I didn't want her to give away all of her money. I knew she was going to need it to help pay for care as her Alzheimer's disease progressed. If you notice that your parent is having trouble writing checks or calculating a tip when you go out to dinner with them, if they're having trouble with simple math, this could be a sign that something's going on. If they're making risky investments, if they are becoming victims of scams. Dad was always so smart with money, but now he's convinced that he's won the sweepstakes and he keeps giving money to someone. Well, that could be a sign that not only has the scammer done a good job of convincing dad, but maybe there's something else going on. Maybe his cognitive ability is impaired and you need to ask questions. You need to get an evaluation. You need to get involved. If your parent is experiencing any decline or they are experiencing issues managing their finances, they're being exploited, like I said, you do need to get involved, but you don't want to force your way in. You don't want to go in and take over because that's most likely going to put your parents on the defensive. I mean, everyone wants to remain independent. And so if you tell your parents, look, I don't think you can manage your finances anymore, you're going to probably get pushback. And so what you want to do is if you've been named power of attorney, go with your parent. Have them take that document, go with them to the bank, and let the bank know that you have been named power of attorney. For any parents who are listening to this, I would encourage you, if you get that power of attorney document drafted sometime soon, if you haven't done it already, let the bank see it now. You can let the bank know I'm fine. I just want you to know that this is the person I'm named as my power of attorney. And so if something happens to me, this is the person I trust who's going to be authorized to make decisions and make transactions with my account. So let the bank know, let the financial institutions know that you are your parent's agent under power of attorney and that you have the legal right now to make financial transactions for your parent. Look for tasks that your parents need the most help with and offer assistance with those tasks. So maybe they're forgetting to pay bills. Offer to help them set up automatic bill payments. Again, focus on the positive though. You don't want to say, Mom and Dad, you're missing bill payments. Let's make sure that you're not missing any more payments by setting up automatic bill payment. Tell them instead, hey, look, automatic payments have been a godsend for me. It makes my life so much easier. I can always make sure that my bills are going to get paid on time. I don't have to worry about putting checks in the mail, which is dangerous because sometimes people will even steal checks out of the mail and use chemicals to wash them and write new recipients and amounts. This is a thing that's happening. There has been an increase in check fraud, and so you want to share with them the benefits of what you're trying to help them with rather than focus on why they can't do that task. Finally, if you are meeting with resistance, get some help from a third party. Maybe it's a doctor or a financial professional, a family friend, a clergy member. Ask that person to encourage your parents to talk with you, to get support from you, because sometimes parents are going to be more likely to listen to that peer as opposed to their child. Um, but again, don't force your way in. Look for ways to ease in. Might take a couple of different approaches, but especially if you've got a parent who's experiencing any sort of cognitive decline, you do need to get involved to protect them and to protect their finances and to make sure that they're not losing all their money, because if there is cognitive decline, they're going to need that money to pay for care as their dementia progresses.
It's all really great advice. I would just close by saying, just have these open and ongoing conversations with your family. Have a financial plan for long-term care, whether that's explicit savings or some form of insurance. Have critical documents in place, and then finally avoid exploitation. And that's what we're so proud to be partnering with Carefull. Really appreciate this, Cameron.
Thank you, Tom.